Welcome to another broadcast of the Debra Rufini Show on the ArtistFirst radio network. All past shows are archived. You can find them at ArtistFirst.com. And now, from England, here she is, your host, Debra Rufini.
Greetings from England. This is Debra Rufini with another broadcast of the Debra Rufini Show. In today's show, I'll be exploring the subject of baiting, or hook and bait, a phenomenon which has recently been brought to my attention and one that I've been witness to. A former guest of mine, the amazingly insightful Christy Parker, had previously spoken about the symptoms and traits of narcissistic abuse. But the term baiting was a new one to me. This is her description of baiting. Baiting or hook and bait are tactics that toxic people use to either start arguments, derail conversations, or get their victims flustered while the victim is standing up to them. Ad hominems are often used to bait someone into reacting badly, as it attacks a person's character or motivations instead of their position or argument. It is meant to derail, get the upper hand, control the victim, and negate their accuser's argument. They use it like breathing. It is their armour. Well, this is perfectly summed up. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you have been witness to something, but you can only sort of put into words what has happened. And it's always good when something has a word and you can just use that word rather than say, what does this mean? So this was really insightful to understand the meaning of baiting or hook and bait. The individual who will be spoken of in this show would have the other person on tenterhooks and pretty much treading on eggshells over anything and everything they said, to the degree that they would be triggered over the slightest thing that wasn't remotely offensive, while having the audacity and freedom to say and do the most vile and abusive things to the other person, then insist that it was them who was making a big song and dance about it, by their natural and expected reaction to the cruelty. Worse still is that the target was forbidden to raise this with them, because they needed to be in a position of control to do this, and if they took responsibility for their own hypocrisy and double standards, then they would have to have stopped doing it. Very clever and sly. It's terribly controlling behaviour to which there is no real logic, only essentially a power trip. It was never the inflictor creating a drama by constantly being triggered over anything and everything. It was the victim creating a big song and dance by simply mentioning that they had to tread on eggshells as a result. Tragically and dangerously, these manipulators are so devious and powerful that they can even manipulate the police with their stories, where they can feed the police with pretty much anything, where they take the manipulator's word for it, consequently accusing the victim in the absence of allegation or investigation, just accusation. As is the case with the situation I speak of here. This is frightening, especially as the case in question involved the safeguarding of a child in danger, where the victim was accused by the police of harassing the abuser in reporting the abuse. Reporting the abuse to Child Protection Services, which should, by law enforcement, be considered a necessity, something that's the responsibility of everyone, every adult, certainly. The evidence for this abuse will no doubt surface with time at some point in the future, when it could sadly be too late. It is essential that the police have evidence before they make such false accusations, given that they can be programmed into belief by the influential narcissist. When they run to the police with their false accusations, they are continuing to provoke their target. So now I'm going to mention numerous examples of baiting from this particular individual. This happened throughout the duration of a mere 10 months. Almost creating a first cause of cruelty, chaos, manipulation, bullying, lies, double standards. Then when the other person dared to challenge the lies or stand up for themselves, they were accused of playing the victim, taking no responsibility for their inflicted behaviour. As you can imagine, this, as a consequence, can feel pretty exhausting, emotionally exhausting. And I think when we feel emotional exhaustion, it can then take effect in physical form. You know, with any emotion, it has a physical effect on the body, doesn't it? We feel sadness and water comes out of our eyes. We get nervous and moisture comes out of the palm of our hands and our heart races faster. So we can have a physical effect by an emotional infliction. And I think, if I remember rightly, I think that was in one of the broadcasts with Christy Parker that she was saying that narcissistic abuse can cause illness, physical illness, because of the emotional state messing with the brain. And of course the brain is a physical organ, so it makes sense that the emotions can affect our bodies deeply. So so without further ado, we'll go into a listing of examples of baiting from this person. They had made contact with someone on a dating site. The person they contacted initially wasn't interested, but after 6 months they had contacted them a second time. However, they had changed their profile name and deleted their photo. In turn, yep, you got it, blaming the other person for not knowing who they were. So a consequence to that first tactic, the other person had no idea that it was them who had made this second point of contact. Both people went on to form a relationship. Before they met, the baiter confessed to having a serious mental health condition. As unfortunate as this was, it became a convenience. Much of the behaviour would be blamed on the mental health condition. The baiter asked their bait to guess the mental health condition in question, but when the bait had guessed incorrectly, the baiter, again, blamed the bait in getting it wrong. So it's basically a no-win situation with someone like this. As they would say, there's Bob Hope and there's no hope. That's a little saying we have in England. I don't know if it's an international term. So yeah, the bait was blamed. As a consequence of that, the baiter got triggered, refusing to communicate until they were ready, and basically taking full control of the situation. So, you can see the manipulative tactics beginning to take place here. The following 10 months would now be a matter of, I have a condition, you therefore must allow me to dictate to you by that condition, otherwise I'll be triggered and get anxious, where you will be the one to blame. A kind of, this permits me to abuse, where it must be consequently accepted. Incidentally, having a mental health condition does not permit a person to abuse. It was agreed that the two people would meet at a time when it was safer to do so. This was when COVID was at its worst, prior to vaccinations, and where the government had given strict instructions for local and essential trips only. So the baiter phoned the bait late one Sunday night, demanding to meet up the very next morning, with the added threat of, if you don't meet me tomorrow morning, you will be responsible for my anxiety attack. I told you that I had a mental health condition, didn't I? Naturally, this guilt-tripped the other person into meeting up, causing them to break the law. The bait gave the condition that provided the baiter did not enter the house, as was the law at the time, asking that the baiter and young family member that was going to come with them to go to the toilet prior to the journey. Upon the arrival, the first thing from the baiter's mouth was, I need to use the toilet. Purely to be in control. The other person at this point sort of kind of predicted that this was going to happen. Always listen to gut feeling. I have a wonderful reverend friend, and with situations in life, various things that have come up, I remember her saying to me that God speaks to us through gut feeling. Never ignore your gut feeling. It's there for a reason. And I think my lovely reverend friend is absolutely spot on in that one. So yeah, this person said, I need to use the toilet. And again, how could the bait refuse this person needing the toilet? Very clever stuff. Very manipulative. Just very, very clever. The young family member also naturally wanted to go inside the house, where the baiter made the bait look bad to this young family member in not allowing them to. One of the initial red flags was that this person had said something incredibly mean to their target. Then, by their natural response of hurt, they proceeded with, I can't be spoken to like this. It's reminding me of how my ex used to speak. But what they were really saying is that they expected to be rude to no consequence, but met with the acceptance of their rudeness, where they could continue. If you refuse to take responsibility for your bad behaviour, it means that you can continue with that bad behaviour, claiming it the other person's problem, when they're not in acceptance of it. Of course they're not going to be in acceptance of it. So, the first meeting was about to take place, the first kind of initial stayover. Again, still at the height of COVID, when no one was... We had bubbles. I don't know if you remember the bubbles. It seems so long ago, doesn't it? It was only, 3 years ago, where, one household could meet with another household, and that was the lot. So this was breaking the bubble, breaking the law. And the young family member claimed to have a sore foot, saying to the bait that they weren't allowed to say why they had a sore foot. So as a consequence, the person whose home it was is, this is not allowed to say what's going on here. Anyway, as it happened, this minor had a foot full of verrucas. Nothing at all on their foot, but was running around contaminating the house. The kitchen lino, anyone knows that verrucas must be covered up. They're highly contagious. No one, certainly adults, don't want verrucas. So the baiter saw no problem with this. Why should this young person have to have a sock on their foot? Naturally, the homeowner was surprised, shocked, mortified by the complete lack of responsibility, no sort of consideration involved. It was just odd. Like, what the heck? What does it matter? Oh, for goodness sake. Creating a big song and dance. So the baiter, in turn, was angry that the person whose home it was wanted this young person to put a sock on. And again, something completely unacceptable. The other person was made to feel that they were just making a fuss over nothing. And the danger is one can be programmed to believe that if you've got an influential manipulator saying this is the case. This was also a tactic to provoke a reaction within the bait, where you're now in a sort of, I suppose, a headlock situation. The person just couldn't do anything. That same stay, it was raining. It was a miserable day. So, because it was raining, the best thing that could be done is to have a barbecue in the garden. Completely impractical. Again, to create an atmosphere, a situation, a response. So the person in question decided to light the barbecue right outside the other person's back door. Not the most practical thing to have done. Filling the house with smoke, basically. To the normal and the non-controlling mind, this just is, it's not just gaga, but it's not acceptable. One can't just allow this to happen because, well, for a start, the smoke alarms are going to go off. It's dangerous to have a house filled with smoke, and it was also filling the home next door, where they had to, shut the windows and shut the door. It was, it was the easiest and perhaps quickest way for the homeowners, for that person to lose friends and neighbours. So what has to happen in that situation? The other person has to frantically waft the smoke out of the house, which in turn was apparently triggering the baiter. Where the expected actions of the bait were, that you're creating this big song and dance about things. This was causing an anxiety attack, supposedly, within the manipulator. So the other person was now just expected to allow their home to be filled with smoke and potentially causing the fire alarms to go off. If that isn't big enough, the bait wasn't even allowed in their own home to keep the door shut, as the young family member was running in and out of the house, where the bait was forbidden, again in their own home, to even ask this child to kindly keep the door shut. As you can imagine, running in and out of a garden in the rain, muddy shoes were involved. So muddy shoes were trodden into the carpets, all up the stairs, in all the rooms, mud everywhere. The homeowner kindly asked didn't make a big song and dance about it, but kindly asked if the next time, naturally, an expected, a normal request, really, that shoes could be removed. No, this request was not acceptable. It was the duty of the person whose house it was to clean the carpets after they had left their muddy trail. How dare you ask us to remove our muddy shoes? But the interesting thing was, whether shoes were muddy or not, the home of the baiter was absent of any shoe wearing. People weren't allowed to wear shoes in their home. So, as with narcissistic manipulation, there's just no logic to the double standards. So, we don't have to take our shoes off in your home when they're muddy, but we don't allow shoes, period, in ours. Don't ask me how. That's just how it is. So, a tactic, clearly, of pure control. Then we come to nighttime, where the guest was walking around all through the night as loudly as possible, stomping about, thumping around, packing in order to leave the next morning. Why this person couldn't have done that in the morning, again, to create a reaction, basically. So as a consequence, the other person had a sleepless night. Come morning, the beta changed their mind, wanting to do something with the child the next day, without consideration that the other person was obviously exhausted. This person then gets the blame for not being fit enough to do an activity the next day. Again, no responsibility taken for that first cause of chaos. While still at the height of COVID, wanting the other person to go up there, pointing out that they needed to be safe because this was prior to vaccinations. This person had very elderly parents that they needed to keep safe. It was essential that we could be protected as much as possible in this crazy situation where there were so many deaths. It was an awful time, wasn't it? Seems like it was a different world back then, really. So the manipulator had promised that they would stay safe and take all the precautions that were expected of us at that time. Then the night before, by then their partner was due to turn up. The beta had sprung on that person that they'd been hugging the neighbours, having a massage. Well, that's they must have had pretty long arms then to keep this 2 metre distance, and socialising in various forms. Once again, getting cross with the other person for standing their ground in wanting to keep safe. On the subject of keeping safe, the beta had formerly led a high-risk life of unprotected sexual promiscuity, having never been tested. Now, to many minds, that would be quite shocking that this has happened in one's youth, and we can all do foolish things in our youth or at any point in life, but many years would have passed, and this person had never, was very likely for a start to have had some form of STI by the way they had lived, which this is not a matter of judgment, it's a matter of safety, had astonishingly never had an STI check. To my mind, that's baffling. But each to their own. So naturally, their partner essentially wanted to stay protected. The baiter in turn took this ideal opportunity to verbally batter their partner by them wanting to get tested. Again, it was just considered another song and dance, another creating a flap by the bait. The manipulator here had also informed the bait that they had cheated on almost all of their partners. Not good news, not something one wants to hear. Then got cross with their bait for their obvious and natural concern. Of course, wanting a conversation and having hesitancy of trust. But that lack of trust to the mind of the baiter had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they were a multiple cheat. The baiter was even in a relationship at the time of making that initial contact with the bait, slipping up in a message of evidence, yet proceeded to get angry with the bait for not trusting them. This person would tell their partner how they could never say, "I would never cheat on you," then accuse the partner of having trust issues. This individual would insist on being a private person, then accuse their partner of not feeling it was a close relationship. Every cause has an effect. Again, not taking into account that they were by nature a cheat. The baiter would inquire as to what went wrong in their partner's former relationships of abuse, and when the nature of the abuse was disclosed, the baiter delighted in accusing their partner of playing the victim. Things which are unquestionable abusive behaviours that any person with just an ounce of human decency would recognise are unacceptable things. But no, the other person was just playing the victim. The abusive behaviour was dismissed as being abusive behaviour. No, it was just a matter of the other person needing to get a grip, really. This one is perhaps not the most disturbing, but nonetheless very interesting. Knowing their partner had mild dyslexia, the baiter bought them a book purely to ridicule them for not understanding it by the words, "I knew it would go straight over your head." Now think about the heart and the mind of someone who would do that. That they would set the trap, they would buy their partner a book, not for the purpose of, this book is really good, let's go through it together, because you might have difficulty in understanding a lot of it, but no, here's a book I've bought for you, you read it, just so that I can poke you and mock you when you don't understand it. It is worrying that there is a young person in the equation here where it's clearly a dangerous situation that sadly it will probably all be too late by the time the deep-rooted harm has been caused. This person had insisted on rearranging their partner's garden, and as a consequence filled the drain with dirt, had jam-packed moving mud from one section of the garden to the other, but of all the places covering and filling the drain. That's interesting. That's not just chance. This was a clever move, a clever tactic, in order that the bait would mention it just so the manipulator could accuse the bait of, again, creating that flap, making a big thing, causing a drama, song and dance, da-da-da. This person was constantly, this wasn't even frequently, this was constantly setting manipulative traps, presenting a situation to install anxiety for the purpose of accusing the victim of channeling their anxiety through them. Shouting and screaming and throwing themselves into fits of rage, installing fear in the other person to then blame that person for feeling fearful of them. They would create that first cause of chaos where it is essential to take action. Then the other person completely blamed and accused of making yet that big song and dance. It is almost as if they are addicted to needing someone to have a go at. The baiter would install anxiety into their bait by their behaviour, then insist that their target be on strong medication to deal with the anxiety produced by their manipulation, chaos, double standards and lies. The anxiety the baiter is responsible for. The baiter is the one requiring the therapy. It is neither the duty nor the responsibility of the victim to pander, for want of a better word, to the abuser's abuse. It's the job of the baiter to seek professional help, to no longer be that manipulative bully. This person would say one thing one moment which you could guarantee would at some point be completely contradicted. Then would put the blame on the other person for asking as to which version they meant. The individual here had firmly expressed how much they stood against occult activity. Then within the final communication, had mentioned about needing to speak to the Ouija board. This was the last straw for the bait. No more. Absolutely no more. At this point, the bait had time to fathom the lies and recognise the extreme of the manipulation, and in turn write a letter to the baiter expressing this. In typical narcissistic fashion, rather than apologise in admittance, the wrongdoing was the fault of the bait for noticing. The bait, of course, as of any other time, needed to be punished. So a harassment claim was made to the police over one letter. In the style of the manipulative controller, they expected to continue messaging the person whom they had made the harassment claim against. Again, that need to be in a position of control and power. Abusers just love to get people into trouble while playing the victim over their inflicted abuse. This person would parade around their house naked with the young family member to then accuse the neighbour opposite of being a peeping Tom, who incidentally was found innocent. The person concerned here would consider the behaviours mentioned not to be the problem. That such things are acceptable and fair, but the crime, the real injustice, is in the mentioning of them. If the abuser who's mentioned in this broadcast doesn't consider themselves to be identifiable by the behaviours spoken of here, then they shouldn't recognise the person in question to be themselves, or they would be admitting to their own wrongdoing. Victims of abuse need to speak up for justice, for self-help, and to be of help to others. The manipulator continues to manipulate all the while the abuse is silenced. This is the real crime. If anyone listening can relate to the kind of behaviour I have spoken of in this broadcast, do please get in touch. Baiting is cruel and unacceptable, and you really don't need to suffer the consequences. It's something that we don't always get to recognise immediately. Again, predominantly due to the programming. If we're programmed that something is normal and we are the problem, then an influential person can actually really get the other person, their target, to truly believe that completely unacceptable behaviour is acceptable when it really isn't. So thank you to the audience for tuning in, and until next time, lots of love and God bless.